Hi. Yeah, good to talk to you. I had a quick comment about a previous question, then I had my own question
Okay.
about Calvinism. I just want to say it's hard to trust a God who, seems to be saying one thing and then meaning another, like how the Calvinist God is. And it says God's not the author of confusion, but it seems if Calvinism's true, he is. And how anything.
Oh, you're cutting out.
My question. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you able to hear all that?
Mostly. I think I followed you so far. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. And my question, I guess, is I find it hard to fellowship with Calvinists because of, what I see the ideology entails. And so that's something I struggle with. And my question is sort of how different does someone's view of God have to be before it's a different God? Because to me, I think Calvinism gets pretty close to, if not already over the line of a completely different person than the God of Scripture.
Right. Well, that's a good question. Let me just say about your first point, I agree with you. In Calvinism, God tells Adam and Eve not to eat that fruit and that there'll be dire consequences if they do eat the fruit. But secretly, he has determined and decreed that they of necessity will eat it. So his real will is for them to eat it because his decrees really reveal what his real sovereign will is. So his real will is that they will eat the fruit and die. But his verbalized will is the opposite. And that's what you're saying. It's kind of hard to trust a God who says one thing and means something else. And that's something that that's one of those great mysteries Calvin always appealed to. He appealed to a lot of mysteries. Every time something he said didn't make any sense, he realized it didn't make sense, so he'd just say that's a mystery. But we don't need mysteries when we just follow the Bible, because the Bible might have some mysteries in it, but it doesn't have anywhere near as many as Calvin had in his theology. Now, how far off can a person's opinions about God be before they've got a different God? I'm going to have to let God decide that. I will say this. When people say, do the Muslims have a different God than Christians have? Or do the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons have a different God than Christians have? One thing I can say is they certainly have a different theology. Now, your theology is your beliefs about God. And Calvinists actually have a different theology than the early church had too, because the first 3 centuries they believed that those Calvinist doctrines, which only existed in the Manichaean heresy at that time, they believed those were wrong doctrines. So they believed that those doctrines were a false view of God, just as we believe the Muslims and the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses have a false view of God. And but does that mean they have a different God? Well, that's a hard call. The reason is because if God is not real, if God has no objective reality, and is nothing more to us than the sum total of our theological statements about him. And I think that's true for many people. I'm not sure they really believe God is real, but they enjoy speculating about his alleged character and things like that. Well, then it could be the same. Well, I mean, it's definitely a different God. If God is nothing else but what I say about God, and you say something different about God, then we have different gods. On the other hand, suppose God really does exist, which is my contention. He is who he is what he is, and every human being who has a thought about him has a thought that either is closer or further from the truth about him. It doesn't change who he is. He's the same God. There is only one real God, and all those who worship the one God, who's the creator of all things, in one sense, they don't have. There's no other God than the one we worship that they could worship, but they could certainly be wrong about him. They could be wrong about him. They could worship him unacceptably. The Jews, actually, in the Old Testament, they believed in the same God we Christians do, but they didn't believe in the Trinity. In other words, their theology about God was different than ours, but it was the same God. And in many cases, even though they were worshiping the true God, they were worshiping him unacceptably. So we have to realize that there's two ways that we could be thinking about this, and it's a bit confusing sometimes. When we say, well, tell me your theology and what you think God is, and I'll tell you if you have the right God or not. I don't know if we're approaching it quite the right way. I think that we should say there is one God who made all things. He is what he is, and some of us have understanding of him closer than others. Some of the propositions that one person makes about God will be more true than the propositions some other person will make, but it's the same God they're talking about. They're not talking about a different God. They're just thinking wrongly or correctly about him. And so I would say, let's say Calvin really described a God very different than the God in the Bible. I think Calvinists would disagree with us on that, obviously, but that's why they're Calvinists. The point is, it's very different theological conception of God. Okay, but does that mean he had a different God? Is there another God out there for him to have those thoughts about, or is he simply having inaccurate thoughts about the same God that we worship? I sometimes have illustrated with the idea of, suppose a man had three sons who were very young at the time he went away to war, and he became a prisoner of war, and none of his sons really know him. They've never had a chance to get to know him, but they have thoughts about him. And one son imagines his father to be tall, dark, and handsome. Another, pictures him as being a rough and rugged and bulky, like NFL star type of guy. And another sees him as some kind of weaselly, little nerdy genius or something, okay. But, they have different views about their dad. But they all have the same dad. It's just that some of them are closer or further from the mark in understanding him. Now, when Dad comes home, he's still their dad, and then they recognize where their views of him were mistaken. But until then, it's not that their different views mean they have three different fathers. It means the one father they have, some of them are in touch with him and some are not. That is, some are in touch with correct views about him and some are not. And I would think, since God actually has objective existence, we need to see it more that way. Now, again, many Christians act as if God does not have objective existence, and your beliefs about God somehow shape him into whatever he is in your belief system. But God is not who he is because we believe certain things about him. He is who he is because he is who he is. And we may have good or bad beliefs about him, correct or incorrect, but that doesn't make him a different God. Now, okay. How wrong can we be in our beliefs about God before he's upset with us? Are the Calvinists making God upset by having those beliefs about him? I don't think that God is angry at people who have limitations on their understanding. If they are, with all their hearts, seeking to know him, seeking to get it right, seeking to honor him. And I believe that many Calvinists are in that camp. I believe their views of God are wrong, but I believe they really are desirous to glorify him and know him. And I think some of them have known him, except they've known him through the perception of their theology. And I don't think God's angry at people for that. But of course, if someone idolizes their viewpoint about God, if someone idolizes their own theology, I don't think God's happy with that.
Okay. I did want to clarify one thing. I wasn't trying to say that there was an actual other God that they were worshiping. I just meant that their view might be so far off that it's kind of missing the point of God.
Right.
But I am thankful that we don't need perfect theology, because I'm sure, despite my best efforts, mine is imperfect as well. So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I know some children who have very much misjudged their parents. And think badly of their parents when their parents are really not like that at all. But it's still the same parents. Now, it's displeasing to the parents if children have an unloving, uncharitable misjudgment of them. But if the children are not being uncharitable and they're trying to understand their parents, but they just don't have the intelligence to understand them, I don't think anyone holds it against someone that they don't have enough, theological savvy. I don't think God holds it against them. But it's your intention and your desire to please God. I think that's more important than how intelligent you are and how well you can frame your theological propositions.